through all these real quick, blah, 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 we don't care. Okay. Tragedy of the commons. So just to kind of make sure we understand this really well, I'm going to play this video.
That you live in a small village and depend on the local fish pond for food. You share the pond with 3 other villagers. The pond starts off with a dozen fish, and the fish reproduce. For every 2 fish, there will be 1 baby added each night. So in order to maximize your supply of food, how many fish should you catch each day? Take a moment to think about it. Assume baby fish grow to full size immediately, and that the pond begins at full capacity, and ignore factors like the sex of the fish you catch. The answer? 1. And it's not just you. The best way to maximize every villager's food supply is for each fisherman to take just 1 fish each day. Here's how the math works. If each villager takes 1 fish, there will be 8 fish left overnight. Each pair of fish produces 1 baby, and the next day the pond will be fully restocked with 12 fish. If anyone takes more than 1, the number of reproductive pairs drops, and the population.
So real quick, that's the idea of sustainability. Sustainability is when you're using a resource at like the perfect capacity that you're always going to have enough of it to go around.
Won't be able to bounce back. Eventually, the fish in the lake will be gone, leaving all 4 villagers to starve. This fish pond is just one example of a classic problem called the tragedy of the commons. The phenomenon was first described in a pamphlet by economist William Forster Lloyd in 1833 in a discussion of the overgrazing of cattle on village common areas. More than 100 years later, ecologist Garrett Hardin revived the concept to describe what happens when many individuals all share a limited resource, like grazing land, fishing areas, living space, even clean air. Hardin argued that these situations pit short-term self-interest against the common good, and they end badly for everyone, resulting in overgrazing, overfishing, overpopulation, pollution, and other social and environmental problems. The key feature of a tragedy of the commons is that it provides an opportunity for an individual to benefit him or herself while spreading out any negative effects across the larger population. To see what that means, let's revisit our fish pond. Each individual fisherman is motivated to take as many fish as he can for himself. Meanwhile, any decline in fish reproduction is shared by the entire village. Anxious to avoid losing out to his neighbors, a fisherman will conclude that it's in his best interest to take an extra fish, or 2, or 3. Unfortunately, this is the same conclusion reached by the other fishermen, and that's the tragedy. Optimizing for the self in the short term isn't optimal for anyone in the long term.
All right, so we're gonna pause there. So the tragedy of the commons suggests that individuals will use shared limited resources in their own self-interest rather than keeping with the common good, thereby depleting the resource. So, interestingly enough, we have all lived through a tragedy of the commons of sorts. When it was 2020, what was the hot commodity that no one could find anywhere?
Hand sanitizer.
Hand sanitizer and toilet paper, right? Which was like the most bizarre thing in the world because COVID did not give you diarrhea. I don't know why everyone decided they needed a crap ton of toilet paper, pardon the pun. But like everyone was taking so much toilet paper that there wasn't enough for everybody just to like have what they needed to survive. Like in normal days, you don't need 3 big Costco-sized toilet papers for a family of 4. Like that's not necessary. So we actually have seen this, that when people are in a panic state or in a state where they think that they need a resource, they are going to take more than they need because it makes them feel comfortable. It makes them feel like they have enough to fall back on, where in reality, they don't need it. And so their behaviors of taking more than is needed affects everybody else around them. It doesn't just affect them because they're good to go, but affects everybody else around them. Another way to talk about this is, who in here is the baby of the family? Where the babies at? Okay, cool. So everyone's like, oh my gosh, the baby of the family is so spoiled. They get everything they want. That's what you think if you're an older sibling. But babies of the family, if your siblings were given a cookie to divide up evenly, how much of that cookie would you actually get? Just a little tiny bit, right? So I have 3 older siblings, and we would do this when we have family trips. My mom would get like a bag of candy, and she'd pass it back. And so Amy and Jessica, my 2 oldest sisters, would sit in the front row of the Suburban, and then Jeff and I were in the back seat of the Suburban, like in the little tiny crunched up seats. And so my mom and dad would take the candy they wanted, then they passed the bag down to Jessica and Amy, and they would take what they wanted, and then the bag would go back to us. But since Jeff was stronger than me, he would take the bag of candy, and then I would be left with like the Whoppers and the Almond Joys. And I'm like, oh, lucky me. Yeah.
My older sister's like, when we were sharing like a bowl of popcorn or something, my oldest sister would just keep eating all of it, but then she would only let me and my sister take one piece at a time, and she would make us open our mouths to make sure we're all gone.
That's hysterical. So trash in the comments, we see it all over the board, but this is a big deal when it comes to the environment, because when we look at the commons, right? The commons for us in the United States, because that's what we're sharing. There are different parts of the commons that are used for different things. And so, like, we look at the land, a bunch of our land is used for federal, state, timberland. So this is not like characteristic to where you're getting the land from. It's just showing you like percentage-wise. Wildfires takes up a bunch of our land. Cow pastures and ranges take up the majority of our land, which is disgusting. Federal wilderness, which like this makes me real sad. So like federal wilderness, where we actually get to enjoy nature, like national parks and things like that, is teeny tiny. There's state parks right there. So you got like all of this. National parks, state parks, federal wilderness is not even close to what we use for cows. We got private family timberland. We have golf courses over here, which is impressive that they have their own little square. Feed exports, livestock feed. So food we eat, we actually grow more food for the cows that we provide than we grow for ourselves. We use more land for feeding animals, which seems really weird in a country where people are going hungry. Wheat exports, corn syrup, rural housing, urban commercial, urban housing, barley for beer. We got land for that too. So when we look at the land we're using, there's a lot of things we have to kind of consider. And you don't need to write anything down on this because there's nothing blue. So feeding the world can be complicated. As you see, like when we look at the land we have in the United States, we are using the majority of our land to feed the animals that we're going to eat, rather than using the land to grow food that we're actually going to eat. And so we get to the idea of the commons and how to use them in a more effective way. So meat production, since we talked about the largest part of the country is used for cows, oh goodness, come back. Anyways, meat is a really important thing. Like not everyone, there's vegetarians, but a lot of the world eats meat, and it's a big part of our diets, especially in America. Americans eat a lot of meat. But because it takes up so much land, it's not really sustainable. So if we look at the different ways that we produce meat, and this is in blue, so I would like for you guys to talk about this, or write this down. We have feedlots, and we have high concentration lots. Sorry, I'm trying to like change this so it works. That's close enough. So, concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, looks like this. And this is what the majority of the land that's used for cows in America looks like. So, they're used as a way to quickly get livestock ready for slaughter. So we have our concentrated animal feedlots, just so we can get a lot of animals ready for slaughter and get them out of there. They tend to be crowded, and animals are fed grain or feed, which is not ideal because cows in nature don't eat grains or feed. They eat grass. And so we're feeding them stuff that is not suitable for them at all, which changes the way the meat is produced. So it generates a large amount of organic waste. So when you have a lot of cows crammed in one area together, you're gonna have a lot of cow poop, like lots. And that organic waste can contaminate ground and surface water. I mean, nobody wants to drink water that's contaminated with cow poop. Sounds like not a fun time. So these concentrated lots, while they are good for the use of area, right? They're less expensive. So if you go to the grocery store and you buy the cheap meat, you're usually buying meat from a concentrated animal feed operation because you can put lots of cows in a small area, meaning that you're not going to be spending a lot of money on land. You're not going to be spending a lot of money. Oh, it's almost time to review. Not spending money on making sure the grass is fine. You're buying the feed really cheaply from the land that we're using to grow food for our cows. And so it's less expensive, but it's not super great for the cows. On this other hand, we have our free range lots. So free range lots allow animals to graze on grass during their entire life cycle. So they can walk around, they can graze on grass, which is what they're supposed to be eating. They are free from antibiotics and other chemicals. So when we look at high concentrated food lots, these animals are fed antibiotics preemptively. So because you have a lot of animals in a small area, we talked about how diseases are a density dependent factor, right? So the more animals in an area, the easier a disease is going to spread. And so farmers will sometimes give these animals antibiotics before they even get sick to prevent diseases. So we're getting more antibiotics in our systems as humans because we're eating the meat that was fed the antibiotics than we actually really need. So we have free range, since the animals are more spread out, they're not going to be needing those antibiotics because they're not cramped together. Organic waste from these animals works as fertilizer. So we go back to the carbon cycle. This poop is going to be used in the soil. It's going to enrich the soil, promote plants growing, which is going to feed the cows again. So rather than contaminating surface water and groundwater, it's going to be used as fertilizer. The downside of this, though, is that it uses large areas of land. So you have a lot of land for this many cows, which is not very many, and it's more expensive. So if you go to the grocery store and you see meat and it has like a sticker on it that talks about like free range, chances are you're gonna be paying more for that meat because they have less cow per acre than these guys do. So there's benefits and drawbacks of both of them, but it's something to be aware of when we're talking about the commons. Like, how are we using our common land to grow our food? So we're actually gonna stop there because my watch told me that it is time to